Well, the fallout from the Edward Snowden revelations continues, and some of the most significant changes could first be happening in the states. In California, state lawmakers have introduced a bill that would ban state agencies from working with the National Security Agency. The bill aims to prevent the NSA from spying on Californians. It would do this by denying NSA facilities in the state access to basic utilities like electricity and water. The bill also bans officials and agencies from cooperating with the NSA. Those that violate the rules would be slapped with sanctions. In a press release, Senator Ted Lieu, who introduced the bill, says, quote, state-funded public resources should not be going toward aiding the NSA or any other federal agency from indiscriminate spying on its own citizens and gathering electronic or metadata that violates the Fourth Amendment. For more on the bill that takes a firm stance against the feds, I'm joined now by Shahid Buttar, Executive Director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Liz.
So I understand that you helped to create the model legislation that this bill is based on. Can you tell us more about the goal of this legislation?
The goal of the bill is to force accountability on the NSA. The courts have abdicated their role, essentially, of guarding constitutional rights. Congress has been abysmally dysfunctional in guarding the Constitution and passing either legislative checks to restrain executive abuses or conducting effective oversight. This bill is a state taking the matter into its own hands, and it aims to cut off the water, cut off the electricity, cut off the prosecutors, and cut off the universities as sources of talent to fuel the NSA's next generation. It's a very aggressive opportunity for other states also to raise their voices, and I suspect that California will not be the last state in which we'll see this bill.
Yeah, it's a very aggressive, very bold move for a state government to take on a massive agency, federal agency like the NSA. Do you think it's realistic?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't describe it as particularly bold at all. I mean, if anything, California is asserting a constitutional position, while the rest of D.C. is asserting basically a Chinese or a Soviet position. And this is not a left-right issue illustrated by the introduction of the bill. It was both a Democratic and a Republican state senator who teamed up to introduce it, reflecting that this is not at all a fringe issue. This is an issue that unites Americans from all walks of life, all points on the political spectrum, and I dare say all corners of our great nation. And again, we will see this also introduced in other states. The particular ones where I think the controversy will be greatest are the states in which the NSA has data centers. So Utah, Maryland figure very prominently in this campaign, and I think that that's where the real battle lines will be drawn. And in those states, people have also been quite assertive. You know, residents of Maryland were dropping 12-foot banners off a highway overpass outside the NSA's front entrance saying, "Save America, close the NSA," over the holidays. With dissent like that from so many different corners, I don't think the agency can withstand the public pressure. And the last thing I'd say is, even if, for whatever reason, you know, if it's deemed to be an overreach by a judge somewhere, what this legislation can be very effective in doing is revealing that the congressional and federal emperor has no clothes and forcing Congress, forcing the courts to take long overdue action to defend constitutional principles and restrain the NSA.
Well, certainly we're seeing demands for action like never before in the wake of these revelations by Edward Snowden. Do you think that we would be having this conversation now if it were not for this massive leak that we're seeing?
There's no question. We absolutely would not. It's the exact same situation as COINTELPRO. You know, just earlier this week, the peace activists who unearthed the FBI's domestic spying operations 40 years ago revealed themselves. You know, Snowden revealed himself a week after his leak broke instead of 40 years. But otherwise, it's the exact same thing. What their leak prompted was a 2-year congressional investigation, which caught the nation's intelligence agencies embroiled in a full frontal assault on the Constitution. Here we are, 40 years later, it's a different federal agency committing a very similarly broad abuse, in fact, a far greater abuse, right? The FBI was simply suppressing activist groups of all different kinds. You know, the movement to end the war in Vietnam, the movement for women's rights, the movement for Native American rights, the Puerto Rican independence movement, you know, you name it. Whereas the NSA is monitoring everyone, everywhere, all the time. I mean, it's preposterous, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Edward Snowden is a hero, no question.
You had mentioned earlier that on a federal level, reforms have been slow to transpire. Do you think that this is kind of the way that it's going to go, that change is going to happen on a state level first? And do you think this could set a precedent for other states to follow suit?
Absolutely could set a precedent for other states. I think ultimately as to whether or not it's the state mechanisms that come to control domestic spying, that's really up to Congress. Whether or not Congress gets off its hands and passes a far-reaching dramatic reform like the USA Freedom Act, or better yet, the Surveillance State Repeal Act, that would take the matter out of the states' hands. I think states will be much less interested in passing